Now I would like to get into my current backup solution that I have. So you might remember from my ChatGPT video that I did not too long ago, I proposed the idea of basically trying to automate my current backup situation. So why this is special is I'm kind of particular about my backups as well. So typically I don't like to back up everything. There's certain things I like to back up. And I have multiple locations where I like to back those things up. And if you see in the past video, you know that I used to basically have AutoHotkey scan a bunch of files and folders. So I would have it scan just after I made a backup, and then right before I'm about to make the next backup, I basically have two separate scans. Then I bring it in Notepad++ and compare the files together, because I basically structure the script in a way that it shows the date modified. So anything that's changed since the last backup will show as differences in this comparison. And then I manually back those things up to all my drives. So basically I'm particular about my backup in that I like to exclude certain files, and I like to be real specific about where I save stuff. I don't want to do it exactly bug for bug on each drive. That just doesn't make sense for me. If you saw that video, you know that I was going to try to basically write an AutoHotkey script to do all this stuff for me, which would take many days. And yeah, I'd lose a lot of time. But I actually found something that's even better. It's a solution that already exists out there. It's completely free, and it doesn't feel like bloatware or anything like pretty much everything else I tried so far. This is software that I like to use called Syncback, which basically allows me to do these exact things completely automated once I get it all set up. So Syncback, if you're watching this, I would probably be willing to sponsor you, because this has saved so many hours and days just getting this backup stuff completed. I was going to write my own solution, and thanks to you, I now don't have to do that. So I'll show you how it works. It feels pretty non-invasive overall. So this is what the Syncback interface looks like. Basically, you create all these different profiles, and a profile consists of a source and destination. You can get really specific with your source and destination. So for every source and destination you create, you use a separate profile. And then there's ways to easily exclude certain files or ignore them. I mean, it's got all this customization. Basically, that AutoHotkey script I was going to write was more or less going to be like this, except way crappier. So by the end of this, if there's any lessons that are learned, it's don't always reinvent the wheel. That's not always the best option. It can be very tempting if you know how to program. You might rather do some 3 months of programming, making something that already exists and you can just use it in 5 minutes. There's certainly going to be cons even with the programming, because that's not going to be perfect. There's going to be cons with using software, but you may as well try the software before you even try to reinvent the wheel. So if you're going to write this program that may be super involved, seriously look at other options. Most of the time that will be the case, but sometimes you might want the experience, so it's a matter of balancing. Do you want to get the experience, or do you want to save time? I'm at a point now where I would much rather save time, and I'm almost tired of programming at this point. Maybe I'll rekindle my energy with it in the future, but I'm burnt out with programming stuff, so this definitely saved the day right here. So basically what you do is you just create a new profile. So Syncback free is what I'm using. It's completely free, and it doesn't feel like bloatware or anything like that. You don't have to schedule your backups at all. That was another major thing. I always like to look at what's getting backed up before I do it, so I don't do any scheduled backups for that reason. And it provides a nice list of exactly what's changed since the last backup. So it literally just copies files to the destination raw. That's the other major thing. So if I want to restore, I can just copy files from the backup as needed, as if I manually copied it over there. I mean, how could I ask for a better solution? That's crazy. I'm getting the benefits of a full backup and an incremental backup at the same time. That's crazy. This is hard to beat with a lot of different things. Of course, there's certain things it doesn't work with, but for the way I'm backing things up, this is absolutely perfect. So I can name each profile. As you can see, I've named like E drive or H drive, whatever I'm backing up to. I can name basically the profile. You typically create a profile for every source and destination you need. I'll kind of illustrate how that works. So, say I want to back up downloads to my E drive. Well, that's kind of a large example. I'll maybe pick a smaller example in a bit here. So let's just say backup to E drive. I can call it whatever I want. A group profile. I'm not going to get into all these little features of it, but a group profile allows you to basically create a profile so it runs one after the other sequentially rather than in parallel. If you don't know what that means, disregard what I said, or just experiment with it yourself. This is one of those things where you can experiment with it yourself and get a lot out of it. So there's different types of backup. I'll real quickly sum up how it works. So basically this backs up everything from the source to the destination that you want to back up. But if anything gets deleted off the source, it gets left alone on the destination. So it kind of delete proofs your stuff, because if you delete something by accident, you can still restore it from a backup. If you do a mirror, it's basically the same thing, except anything that's deleted on the source gets deleted on the destination as well. So if you need an exact configuration of something, almost like an image, then mirror is good for that. If there's basically any folder where you delete it on the source, you also want it to delete on your backup automatically too. And that's automatically done, which rocks. It'll basically show you what's going to happen before it happens, so you can confirm and make adjustments if it does something wrong, which is pretty nice. And synchronize basically goes both ways. Anything that's on the source will be on the destination. Anything that's on the destination will also appear on the source. So it's basically exact both ways. This is exact one way, and this is pretty much exact one way also, but anything that gets deleted is still in your backup when you run it again. So as you can see, I have some backups and mirror, because that's how particular I am about my backup too. I can tell it exactly how I want things done. This took at least 10 or 15 hours to set up. Took a long time, but that's all of that setup is basically from me telling it exactly how my backup works, since I'm very particular about it. Now that I have it set up, I barely even have to think about it anymore. Compared to how much time I was spending manually, I am still getting a massive return on investment here. So yeah, I mean, if I were to write this myself, I'd be spending many hours writing it, and then I'd be getting it to just work the way it's supposed to. This basically allows me to skip the program writing process and get it to work exactly how I want. So it's great. So basically, I'm pretty much never going to use synchronize. And then right here, do I want it to get deleted on my backup when I delete the original file? Or do I want it to stay on the backup even if I delete it from the original source? If I want it to stay on the backup no matter what, click this. If I want files to potentially get deleted from the backup that I deleted, click that. So right now I don't really care. Typically this is what will be used, but yeah. And then I can just click done. This looks a little weird, but it'll still work. So now the wizard will come up where you set this up. So now you can select what you want to back up, which could be either a whole drive or a subdirectory. So I don't actually want to back up stuff on my C drive because all my personal files are on a whole different drive. But let's say I wanted to back up everything in my documents and downloads, but I want to ignore everything else, like my desktop and app data. I still select this for the source. And then let's say my destination is my desktop on my D drive. Kind of a poor choice, but it should illustrate stuff. So any folders that are in the source will be folders on the desktop. Any files that are in this will also be files right on the desktop. I don't really want that, but I'm just illustrating. So here's where I make the exclusions. So let's say that I only want my documents and downloads and nothing else. I can just highlight all this and uncheck everything, and then manually check documents and downloads. Because desktop is unchecked, that won't even get included in the backup. So it'll literally copy these files over to this destination path as if I were manually copying it. But this is all that's getting included right here. Everything else is excluded. That's a good amount of control right there. And then the other thing to keep in mind that I did not know right away was, so let's say that I want everything in here, but let's say I don't want anything that appears in my documents in the future. Then on that source folder, I might want to say ignore new files. Because right now I can check and uncheck items, but what if new items appear in there? Do they automatically get checked? Or do they automatically get unchecked? This is where you set that. So if I want everything from this point on to automatically get unchecked when it appears in the documents, then I can ignore new files for documents. And then I may want to treat folders the same way or differently. I do the same thing with folders. Let's say I wanted any new folder to automatically get backed up, but I don't want any new files to get backed up. This is how I configure that for this particular folder. So as you can see, it gives a whole lot of control. And I hit OK when it's what I want. Now don't try to get it right on the first time. That's a little bit too excessive. So yeah, like I said, when you back it up, it'll show exactly what's getting backed up. And if something's wrong, then you can go back in and change stuff so that it's no longer wrong. That's exactly what I did. I've had probably about 100 iterations of changing stuff, at least. That's not an exaggeration. So yeah, I mean, that's how a profile works. And then you can run the profile whenever you want. You can simulate a run where it tells you what it would do, but it won't actually do those things, which is kind of cool. So this is a list of everything it's going to do. And then you can either continue the simulation or abort. The simulation is helpful for network drives because if you have a network share that you're backing up to, the simulation should tell you if that's going to work or not. Especially if you do an unintended simulation, actually, I don't know if that's even possible, but you can do an unattended run, which is typically what happens when you schedule something to run. If you manually run something, then it'll show that dialog box before anything happens. And then you can abort if something is wrong. Change it, then run it again. If it's correct, then you can tell it to actually run it, just like how I told it to do the simulation. I'll go through a demo with my actual files. So, yeah. So anyway, with the way I have this structured, basically my E and H drive are pretty much the same. There might be some stuff that I don't want on the H drive that I do on the E drive. Those differences are in the profile configuration, where I choose the subdirectories and files. So as you can see here, with my mirror, I want certain files mirrored rather than dumped, which I already explained the differences before, so if you need that again, go back. But anything that's mirrored is in this profile. If I want something in the documents that's dumped instead, I'll go to the backup version of the documents backup, and then select those files that I want dumped. Then of course you can see I have configurations with ignoring new files for some things. That's for things that aren't in there yet, that I haven't decided to include or exclude at this point. See, I don't even think that my program would be good enough to do that unless I spent way too much time and made myself miserable. See, something already exists that allows me to do that. How great is that? But seriously, Syncback, if you want to sponsor this, then yeah, I don't think I'd have a problem with that. So it's got a whole bunch of other functionality too. So if you're doing a network share, like an SMB or NFS, and they have special credentials, those credentials are specified right here. Some other things worth noting is you have an unattended backup that runs on a schedule, which you might prefer. I don't, just because I don't always have my external drive hooked up, and I often have to make changes to it. I don't want unattended backups if I always have to make changes. Since I'm very particular about it, it still saves so much time compared to what I used to do. So if you change your mind on how the backup works, you can change that right here. Something that's also worth noting is if you want email logs for scheduled backups, you just click on that more, or the expert, go to log, email log, and then you can set settings right here. If I do like a Google Workspace account that's got a custom domain, I'll click Gmail because it sets these settings correctly. The to and from both need to be from that same email. Maybe you might want to do something different, but I usually do the same thing. I usually put something descriptive in the subject so I could use Gmail filters. Then I can have it automatically go into Gmail labels and skip the inbox altogether. That's useful if you're managing a whole bunch of these. And then I find that with Gmail, I do need to specify user and password, so I'll put the email address here again, just like I did in these two places. And then you can also use app passwords, which is a Google feature that's typically used for two-factor authentication. And if you have less secure apps disabled, which is what would allow you to do it with a third-party service like this, if it's disabled, then you can use the app passwords, and you don't actually have to put your email password in there. So if that's a security problem for you, then yeah, you can put an app password in there instead, and then it can even be used to sign into your actual email. And then always run a test when you set this up. Seriously. And then one thing that's worth noting is, as of right now, there might be a glitch where it says email log failed even though the actual backup succeeded. In that case, you want to go into the advanced tab and don't attach the log file, just send the email body. Have that unchecked. That seems to fix the problem, but then your actual log file won't even be included in the email. But even if it says email log failed, that doesn't mean the backup failed at all, and you can probably disregard that. Just deal with that problem. So there's a whole bunch of different options. I would encourage you to experiment with this, but it's one of those things where you can have it be as basic or as advanced as you want. So yeah, let's actually run it. So let's say I want to back up my E drive and H drive, both the mirror and the normal. I control click all these backups, and then I would normally click run, but I set it to not show the dialog again. So the dialog where it shows like what's actually happening, I set it to not show that again, but I regret doing that. If I press WinR, the shortcut for it, then it shows up. So did you see how quick it scanned that? That's the change. That's what would have showed up in the manual comparison with Notepad++. If I'm happy with that, tell it to continue, otherwise aborts. I am happy with it. I already know that I'm happy with these things. That's why I said aborted before. I wanted to make sure this will work before demonstrating it. So I am happy with all these things that are listed here too, so I just continue. See, I could look through this list, and if there's something wrong, I could just click abort, make the change to the profile, run it again, and check if it's right again. If it's not good, run it. See how much better this is than trying to make my own solution? This has been around for decades, I think, and very tried and true if you ask me. It will have a hard time backing up certain things like services. Say you wanted to back up Hyper-V, for example. This probably won't be able to do that unless you can manually select the files and deal with the files rather than some third-party service that takes care of the backup and restore process, which would probably be a lot better. And I know you're thinking you can just go into Hyper-V and back things up, but what about automating the backup? What if you want that automated? Then what? Maybe you can schedule it, I don't know, but that might be more advanced than just using some backup software that's got it integrated. Especially if it has a cloud thing integrated. If you want this to automatically back up to, let's say, Google Drive or your self-hosted cloud service, you might need Syncback Pro, which is like $60 USD dollars. But it's a one-time fee if you're willing to deal with whatever version you get, since they make upgrades every year. So I think that's gonna pretty much be it for my Syncback demonstration. One thing I also forgot to mention with Syncback is I can back up the profiles themselves. So if I spent hours configuring it, which I have, I want to back that up. So I just highlight all of them with Control A, go to Export, and then I can select where I normally save them and just select folder or whatever, then it exports to that location. And then this will back it up to my other drive. And Google Drive will pick it up. So I have it backed up to an SD, a mechanical drive, and Google Drive, so I'm pretty set with backing up my profiles too. So then I can easily bring my profiles back if I need to set everything up again, or some disaster actually happens. So now I'd like to talk about basically how I do this with Google Drive. So for some of my cloud backups, I like to back up basic stuff to Google Drive, like text files where I don't necessarily care about privacy, but I do want an offsite backup. I use Google Drive for basic stuff like that. Since I have a really crappy upload speed, I do keep it real minimal. But I would like to show a very similar quality of life improvement that I made to Google Drive, just like I did with my local backup. And I'll show kind of how I did something very similar with Google Drive within the same week. So I'll kind of show you what it used to entail. So back when I used to put things on Google Drive, if I wanted to just update existing files, it was kind of a pain to deal with. I'll give you an example of what it used to be like, and then what I like to do now, which is way better in my mind. So let's say that I regularly back this up because it changes pretty much on a daily basis. So every night I'd back it up myself, which was kind of a pain, but I'll show you what I do now, of course, too. So I'd go to Google Drive, just like this. This is kind of a pain in itself. Then I would, so this is, let's say this is a file I need to back up. It's not really now, but for demonstration purposes, I could manually go in here and see what files changed myself, but sometimes it's not worth wasting time trying to figure out what changed manually. I'm trying to get rid of manual labor just like I did with my local backup. So rather than doing that, I might just upload the whole thing again. The problem with doing that is it stores all the copies that I upload, even previous copies, so I can roll back if I made a mistake or something. And see this? Because there's so many files, this is happening too. I always have to deal with this pretty much every day. Then if I make a last minute change just after I backed it up, I either have to manually figure out what changed or do this again. I haven't done this for months. The amount of time I have to wait has been going up by the day pretty much, because files are always growing. So yeah, imagine if I had to keep dealing with this all the time. I usually leave this alone because when it starts, see, told you, when it starts working, then it starts working. Do I want to keep separate copies or do I want to replace? I used to say replace. Even if there's stuff that's the same, it's getting re-uploaded again. I have crappy upload speed, so look how long this is taking. Probably can't see that. Look how long that's taking. Yeah, this sucks. It's nice to have a cloud backup, but you know. So for the longest time, I always wished I could use Google Drive Desktop. But I was kind of off-put by it for the longest time because I had a feeling it was going to function just like Dropbox, where everything that's stored on the drive is also stored locally and wherever it is. Well, the problem is I have my files stored in a specific place, and if I wanted to be able to use the Google Drive backup, then I'd have to store multiple copies, which is a waste of space and just kind of a pain overall. But Google Drive Desktop actually has kind of a cool feature that you might not be aware of, where you don't even have to do that. There's two different ways you can use it. You can either synchronize everything from Google Drive onto your system, which I don't want, or you can stream the files where it's actually stored on Google Drive, but you can see it on your computer, but it's like a network map, like a network drive. See, now it just finished uploading after all this time. I'd have to deal with that on a daily basis, which is a pain. But yeah, I mean, when you stream files, Google Drive is literally like a network drive, like an SMB or NFS type share. And it's not stored on the computer at all. So if you're closed-minded about Google Drive Desktop like I was, you don't have to store everything on the system. you can just stream the files. So what I can do now is basically have the Google Drive app running. It can detect changes just like my local backup does. It can detect changes and only do that, and then not even store multiple copies. It just updates it as things change. And it does only those files. It detects the changes all by itself, and it's way quicker than what I just did that manual way. So it's pretty sweet. So if we look in the corner right here, as you can see, it just synchronized those 4 files. Those were things that have changed since since I last backed things up. Those are things that have actually changed. So what I can do is go to preferences and add all the files that I want to back up. So all my files are right there that I want backed up to Google Drive. Here's where you tell it to not synchronize everything to your system. Everything is stored in the cloud only. You can access it from a drive letter or else a folder on the system. You don't need to use a drive letter. I prefer not to have my Google Drive in a drive letter. That's just how I am. But you can tell it to tell it to display your files symbolically in some folder on the system, which is exactly what I've done. So rather than using a drive letter, I have it go to a specific folder, and then I can create hard links. So let's say that I only want to back up one folder and I have files all over the place. I can create hard links of files, and even if it's stored on a different place in the system, it'll still go to Google Drive because it's a hard link, and Google Drive treats it like the real file, even if it's actually located somewhere else. And that's useful because I might have some very random files that I want to back up, but I don't want Google Drive to back up that whole folder. I may just want those specific files, and to have it always automatically pick up those specific files. So I'll create what's called a hard link, which is like a shortcut on steroids pretty much. And even if I have it at some random location, Google Drive will ultimately still pick it up without picking up everything else in that folder, just what I want. So that's pretty useful. So the way I create hard links in Windows is I basically use a program called link shell extension. You can do this in the command line, but I've been using link shell extension for years and I'll continue to use it. So let's say I wanted to back up this file right here. Right click, pick link source, and then let's say that this was my Google Drive folder. It's not really, but you know. Then I can right click, drop as a hard link. This looks like the real file, doesn't it? But it's really a shortcut. So Google Drive treats it like the real file even though it's not actually the real file. So if you're doing this across different drives now, hard links won't work. You have to use a symbolic link, which doesn't quite function the way I want. In that case, I'll maybe create a folder on that other drive and have Google Drive pick up that folder too. That's fine. So any changes that are made to this file, the hard link picks it up in this other location. And thus Google Drive will pick it up too. So that's really handy. So the other kind of gotcha is if you go to the actual Google Drive interface, where is it actually stored? You actually have to go under computers and it'll create this folder for your computer that you set up. As you can see, I have it set up on this thing too, but on Windows, I go to my computer, those are all the things. So it picks up those changes like it shows right here. and they automatically go in this folder. It's not where I originally had it stored, but I don't care. Besides, I might actually treat things differently on different computers, and I actually want them to store their own versions. In that case, I got the corresponding ones here. It might take up a little extra space, but so what? I'm storing mostly text files. Those are mainly what I care about backing up, and they're all there. So this is almost as good as the Syncback stuff, considering what I was doing before too, isn't it? I discovered this in the same week as Syncback. So yeah, I like this. The thing that I don't really like about it is because it's running all the time, it's always going to pick up changes. What if I'm modifying some file and save it like every 10 seconds? It's going to keep re-uploading every time. I mean, I could deal with that, of course, but it's just kind of unnecessary if you ask me. So I'm going to show you what I've been using to deal with that, so that I can basically manually initiate the Google Drive backup in this new fashion. I'm going to show you how I manually do that. So what I actually do, what I was originally going to do is set a firewall rule so that the Google Drive firewall is only allowed if I want it to back up, and use a keyboard shortcut to turn it on and off, the firewall. But while I did get it working on Windows, I think it's a little bit different on Mac. So I decided to do a much simpler approach than trying to toggle a firewall on and off. So what I actually do, first of all, is I just have Google Drive not run unless I want it to back up. So I used to go to pause syncing for the longest time and then resume, but that's kind of a pain. If I was able to do that with a keyboard shortcut, that would be the ultimate. If I could keep Google Drive running, but toggle pause and resume with a keyboard shortcut, then I'd be set. So what I like to do universally across Mac and Windows is I just quit, and then I have an AutoHotkey script to turn it on and off. On Mac, I'll do something else. I never set it up on there yet because I'm not really using that yet. But on Windows, I have it automatically start Google Drive with the AutoHotkey shortcut, and then it shuts off after 2 minutes, because that should be enough time to make my changes synchronize. So anytime I want to back up Google Drive, I just go like this, type in my G Drive shortcut, hit space, then Google Drive is now in the tray. It's logging in. Then it'll synchronize all the changes and then close itself after 2 minutes, which should be enough time. I might manually start it if I know it's going to take longer, like if I add a new folder and my upload is horrible. So how did I actually accomplish that? Well, using this right here. So I have it run that Google Drive executable. That's where it's actually stored. Now this version might change if Google Drive updates. In that case, I just have to update this script to reflect the new version. Then of course the script will get backed up. This is one of the things I have backed up to Google Drive, by the way. So that's my offsite backup for this. So once it runs the executable, have it wait 2 minutes. And then here's how it kills the process with the command line. I have it kill all of the instances. So if you actually look at the task manager, then you'll see there's several different instances of Google Drive FS. This command will kill every single instance, and it works properly. So yeah, that's how I do my Google Drive backup. So basically at the end of the day when I want to back things up, all I really have to do is come to here, click on Syncback. Usually I back these up once I have my external drive hooked up. Press Control R to run the backup. So that thing that just popped up was the Google Drive thing quitting. I'm not going to bother trying to hide the window. It's not a really big deal. And of course I have an Obsidian vault, which I've talked about in the past, and we're going to actually get into that later in this casual video. But if I want to back up Obsidian to my SSD, just go like this. Doesn't even come up with the prompt. I know it's gonna work. I don't need to double check anything. There we go. Of course that gets backed up to Google Drive as well. So then once I'm done with these backups, then I run G Drive and hit space. I should probably also clarify, this is basically Expanso, and I have a shortcut to pull that up. It's just a text prompt, kind of like on Mac how I can use Spotlight search. I just wanted something like that on Windows, and I'm using the Expanso thing for that. So typically when I do text expansion, it doesn't always work correctly. I have to put the desktop in focus, then type in my stuff, because AutoHotkey is not always in focus. But it is if I do this, and then I can see what I'm typing as well. It's really just a dialog box, so I can type in it. I could use the search bar down here too, but every time I want to close this out, this, then I hit the start button. Instead of just closing and comes back to here, then I have to hit it again. I can hit escape, but that's just a pain. So this is a lot easier, just pulling up the, not Spotlight search, but Expanso. Pretty nice. So while we're on topic here, there's a few other quality of life improvements that I made that typically use the right-click context menu. And this applies to both Windows and Mac. So I think with the next thing that I'm going to explain, I'm going to start by explaining it on the Mac because it'll actually make a little more sense. So let's switch over to Mac. One thing that I like to do now is basically marking files for deletion. So if I have a lot of temporary files that take up space, then I have a lot of wasted space over time. So if I want to free up that space, I have to go through pretty much all my files and decide what I want to keep and delete, which is kind of a pain if we're being perfectly honest. It's even a pain to use file tree viewers because it just takes a lot of time by comparison to walking through all these markers that I've created. So one thing that I've recently devised is, if there's a file that I know I'm going to eventually delete to free up space, I mark that file, and then rather than going through the whole hard drive, I look through what I marked and simply delete those when I'm ready to. So the way I accomplish that on Mac is just simply using tags. So obviously this is marked because I want to delete that eventually. So on Mac, I'm showing this on Mac because it'll be easier to understand. Mac has a really cool way of doing this. So I know that I eventually want to delete this file right here, let's say. So all I have to do to mark it for deletion is to go like this. Just add a red tag to it. I use red for things I'm eventually going to delete. I can use pretty much any color. The file still works like normal. Let's say I also want to delete this eventually. Mark it red also. So then what I can do is go to my red tags right here. Basically that's my list of files that I eventually want to delete. So let's say I'm like, man, I have no hard drive space left. I really need to free stuff up, but I don't want to take the time to do it. Well, what I can do is just simply go to my marked files and be like, this is what I want to delete. I may end up going to the source, but this at least allows me to create a very quick list. It creates a list of files and I hardly spend any time making the list at all. Then I just simply work through everything in that list and I'm set, rather than going through the whole hard drive. I just have to remember to mark everything, which I'm actually pretty good at, especially considering how much time I waste going through stuff in the first place. Yeah, it made that big of an impact in my life that I won't forget to mark stuff, because I wasted so much time already. So this is kind of a neat way to basically mark files for deletion. Then I can go ahead and delete it when I'm ready. Actually, I think deleting this will delete the real thing on Mac. On Windows, it's a bit different. So what I do on Windows instead is gotta switch my keyboard and mouse back to Windows, then I'll be able to switch this to Windows too. Let's say this is something I want to eventually delete. True story, by the way. This is just temporary. So on Windows, the way I accomplish the same thing, since I can't do the tagging system, is I simply create a shortcut that goes in a specific folder. And then I simply walk through the shortcuts in the same way I would here on the Mac. So all I have to do to create the shortcut is go to send to delete. So now I've created a shortcut in a specific folder. I'll show you how I did that. So all I have to do now is open the to delete folder. Those are basically my tagged items, if you will. And there it is. Well, actually, this is what I just created. There was something that I did in the past that only worked for files and not folders, I think. But this will work with files and folders. So that's pretty nice. So then I can just walk through this when I want to free up space. There's more stuff that should be there, but I never started marking it yet. So how do I accomplish this? So as you saw, I right-clicked it and clicked Send To. I basically added the context menu item. It's a batch script. Not my favorite method of doing it, but it works, so no more time is going to get wasted on that. And yes, I believe I have that script backed up too. This is probably something that's also going to appear on my GitHub someday too. So how do I actually do that? You put it in a folder called shell send to. You can put in this run dialog, shell send to. That's your send to folder. So all I did was I put this batch script right in there. And what the script actually consists of is this right here. So it creates these variables basically defining everything. This is the folder I'm saving it in. You saw me pull it up with AutoHotkey before, and that's the folder that all these shortcuts go in. So when I right click on an item, this is the syntax you can use to retrieve information like the file name and the actual extension itself in the file. So I declare those variables so I have access to each component within my script. Then what this does is it creates a shortcut, and then I believe this stuff actually moves the shortcut into where it belongs. So basically this is creating a temporary Visual Basic script because that's what AI suggested that I do. So it works. So that's exactly what I'm doing. So it runs through all this and then it deletes the temporary script. Because the script, I believe, is specific to the file that I'm actually doing. I could create a more permanent script if there wasn't stuff changing in it all the time. So yeah, why not create a temporary script with what it's supposed to do, delete it, then that way it's not always in the right click context menu, because otherwise the script appears in here, I believe, and it would always appear in this menu too. This kind of makes it a little bit seamless. So that's how I accomplish that right click context menu. So that's pretty neat, if we're being perfectly honest. Okay, now I'm going to show another quality of life improvement I made using the context menu on the Mac. I did something very similar but not exactly the same. So I'm going to show you how I added a context menu inside of Mac itself. So let's switch over to there. Switch to keyboard and mouse. So now I'm going to show how I like to add files to backup on the Mac. Typically my files don't automatically appear. So what I like to do, since they don't automatically appear in Google Drive and I don't want to keep adding folders for everything, not including what I don't want, is I just right click what I want to back up. Let's say I wanted to back up this arrow file for some reason. All I have to do is right click and click Symlink for Google Drive. And just like that, my Google Drive will pick it up now. So what I've done on here is I have a Drive backup folder. And this contains basically everything that I'm backing up in a single folder. Pretty much all these things are Symlinks. This is the actual context menu item. I backed that up itself in case I want to set it up on another environment, or I destroyed this one for whatever reason. So basically all it really does is it creates a hard link in this folder and Google Drive will pick it up. So it doesn't just create a hard link, it creates a folder of basically the parent directory. It creates a folder with the same name as the parent directory. Basically, it's an attempt to solve the problem that sometimes my file name might be the same thing, but it's in a whole different folder. This will hopefully allow me to deal with that by having it automatically create a folder of the parent folder's name inside of here. Then it puts the file right in that folder. So how am I accomplishing that? I think I could do it with folders too. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know, but I can click Symlink for Google Drive and then it puts it right inside of here. So this folder is called editing. This arrow that I added is in a folder called editing. So therefore, when I go on my Drive backup, I look for the editing folder. And there's a Symlink of it. Or rather a hard link of it, and now Google Drive will pick it up. Once it's running, I don't have it running right now, so it's not picking it up yet, but once it's running it will pick it up. So how do I accomplish that? I basically use Automator in Mac. So you can use a program called Automator, and then you can create a script that effectively does that. Similar to what I did in Windows, but not exactly the same. So I just go to File, New, Quick Action, and then I basically just add a shell, run shell script, I believe. Drag that in here. And then I also want to change this up here to files or folders in Finder, because that's the only environment this is ever going to run in. Then I want, this is just an icon, fine with that. Then I write the script that allows me to move the file to the Google Drive folder. Whatever is needed to make that happen, basically. So I'll pull up what I've already done. So this is the actual script that I run. So this is a for loop because it might be a folder, I think, so it can iterate through everything, or it's just a single file, I don't know. Actually, it makes it easier to access the folders and files as a variable so I can do stuff with it in my actual program. So it gets the name of the parent directory and this $F. That's basically the file that I right-clicked on. That's how you reference it in the script. So the parent directory is the dir name of that. Destination directory is this. Then it creates a parent folder of that parent folder's name in the new destination. Then it creates a hard link in that. So again, a symbolic link works across multiple drives, but it's not like a true shortcut or anything. A hard link, Google Drive thinks it's a real file when it's just a link to it, and Google Drive will back it up correctly. So that's how I added that context menu item. Then I pretty much just saved it, and then it appeared right in the right click menu. I could create another one and have that appear here too. I think because I selected Finder, that's why it actually appears in Finder and pretty much nowhere else. So if you want to make this yourself, take what you will of this and make it exactly how you want.